The air in Director Alan Thompson's office was refrigerated to a precise inorganic chill, a stark contrast to the humid July heat shimmering on the windows outside. It was an expensive, calculated cold designed to make people uncomfortable. It was working. Sarah Jenkins felt a prickle of sweat on her neck despite the chill, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. Across the gleaming mahogany desk, Thompson steepled his fingers, a portrait of serene corporate power. His suit was immaculate, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. Beside him, Dr. Evans, the facility's senior physician, slouched with an air of profound boredom, as if this entire conversation was an annoying procedural delay before his afternoon tea time. "So you see, Nurse Jenkins," Thompson said, his voice as smooth and cold as the marble coasters on his desk. "It's a most unfortunate situation. A clerical oversight, you understand." Sarah stared at him, the words struggling to arrange themselves into a coherent thought. For 31 days, she had poured every ounce of her professional and emotional energy into the Hope and Honor Transitional Care Facility. She had worked double shifts she wasn't asked to work, logged her hours meticulously, and treated the veterans on her ward with a dedication she hadn't felt since she was a rookie fresh out of nursing school. "I don't understand," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "My contract. I signed it. HR processed it." Thompson offered a thin, reptilian smile. "Ah, yes, about that. When our parent company, Medicor Solutions, finalized the acquisition last month, they instituted a retroactive, system-wide hiring freeze. Your contract unfortunately fell within that window. It was never formally activated in the central system." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the frigid air. "From a legal and insurance standpoint, you were never technically an employee." The statement was so absurd, so brutally dismissive of the month of her life she had just given, that for a moment, Sarah could only blink. Dr. Evans shifted, sighing with theatrical impatience. "Enthusiasm is no substitute for paperwork, my dear," he scoffed, not bothering to look at her. "We appreciate the pro bono work, of course," Thompson continued, the condescension in his tone like a physical slap. "But your continued presence here is a liability. We simply can't have volunteers performing complex medical duties. Imagine the insurance implications. So, effective immediately, you should consider your time here concluded." He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was a formal letter filled with sterile corporate jargon that amounted to a single devastating message. "You do not work here. You were never paid. Go away." Sarah looked from the letter to the two men. Their faces were blank, impassive walls of bureaucracy. They were not just firing her. They were erasing her, negating a month of sweat, compassion, and backbreaking work as if it had never happened. The injustice of it was a physical thing, a hot, metallic taste in the back of her throat. This wasn't a clerical error, this was theft. 6 weeks earlier, Sarah had walked through the same lobby doors with a heart full of fragile hope. Laid off from her job at a major city hospital after a brutal restructuring, she saw the position at Hope and Honor as more than just a paycheck. It was a calling. Her grandfather, a man of quiet strength and endless stories about his time in Patton's Third Army, had instilled in her a profound respect for those who had served. To care for veterans wasn't just a job, it was a way of honoring his memory. The lobby was a facade. Gleaming floors, patriotic artwork, and a smiling receptionist promised a level of care that the wards themselves betrayed. Her orientation was a rushed tour led by an older, exhausted nurse named Gloria, whose cynicism was a shield forged over years of disappointment. "Rule number 1, Gloria had said, gesturing down a long, dim hallway where the paint was peeling. "Keep your head down. They care about budgets, not bodies. Rule number 2, don't get too attached. It's a revolving door of forgotten soldiers and paperwork." Sarah was introduced to the men of Ward C, her new charges. They were a cross-section of American conflict. There was Sully, a Vietnam vet with a prosthetic leg, a razor-sharp wit, and an immediate, almost pathological distrust of anyone in a position of authority. He'd sized her up with piercing blue eyes and declared, "Another lamb to the slaughter." There was David, a Marine barely 22 years old, whose youth was a shocking contrast to the ancient trauma that haunted his eyes. He'd returned from a tour in Iraq with his body intact, but his mind shattered by IEDs and ambushes. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his voice was a hesitant whisper. And then there was Mr. Arthur Art Peterson. He was a wisp of a man, likely in his late 70s, with pale, translucent skin and a habit of staring out the window for hours on end, as if watching a film only he could see. The staff file described him as compliant and no trouble, which Sarah quickly translated to ignored. He never complained, never asked for anything, and so he received nothing beyond the bare minimum. Sarah had tried to make a connection on that first day. "It's a beautiful view, Mr. Peterson," she'd said, standing beside him. He'd given a slow, deliberate nod, his eyes never leaving the distant skyline. He didn't speak. She saw a flicker of something in his gaze, not emptiness, but a profound, bottomless sadness. It was a look she'd seen before in her grandfather's eyes late at night when he thought no one was watching. It was the look of a man who had left the most important parts of himself behind, in a place no one else could ever visit. She felt an immediate, inexplicable pull to protect him. The moment that sealed her fate came 3 weeks into her tenure. It was 2 a.m., the dead of night, when the facility's ghosts roamed the halls. A frantic shout echoed from David's room. Sarah, who was finishing up her charting long after her shift was supposed to have ended, ran toward the sound. She found David backed into a corner of his room, his eyes wide with terror, sweat soaking his t-shirt. He was hyperventilating, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. The on-duty night nurse, a young temp named Brenda, stood in the doorway, a loaded syringe in her hand. "He's having another episode," Brenda said, her voice shaking. "Dr. Evans said to sedate him if he gets like this." "No," Sarah said firmly, stepping between Brenda and the terrified young Marine. "Put that away. He's not violent. He's drowning." She approached David slowly, her hands open and visible. "David," she said, her voice low and calm. "It's Sarah. You're safe. You're at Hope and Honor. You're in Alexandria. It's 2025. Look at the floor. Feel the tile under your feet. It's cool, isn't it?" She didn't use his military rank. She used his name. She guided him through grounding exercises, her voice a steady anchor in his storm of panicked memories. She talked about the weather, about the terrible coffee in the break room, about anything and everything that was real and present. Slowly, agonizingly, the tension began to seep out of his body. His ragged breaths evened out. The wild terror in his eyes receded, replaced by a deep, shuddering exhaustion. He slid down the wall and sat on the floor, burying his face in his hands. Sarah sat on the floor a few feet away from him, not touching, just being there. She stayed for 2 hours, long after he had fallen into a fitful sleep, just to make sure he didn't wake up alone. In the quiet darkness of that room, watching over a young man who had given his peace of mind for his country, Sarah understood. Gloria was wrong. These weren't just entries in a budget ledger. Sully, David, Art. They were men who had been promised honor and were being given neglect. In that moment, she made a silent, unbreakable vow. She would not be the one who walked away. She would not abandon them, not for anything. She had no idea that this quiet promise, made in the middle of the night, would soon cost her everything. The cold, hard finality of Thompson's dismissal left Sarah sitting in her beat-up 2008 sedan in the facility parking lot, the engine off, the rejection letter a poisonous thing on the passenger seat. The humiliation was a physical ache in her chest, but it was quickly eclipsed by a tidal wave of pure cold panic. Rent was due in a week. Her son, Leo, needed new shoes. The pantry was already a sparse landscape of store-brand pasta and canned soup. The tears came then, hot and furious. She pounded the steering wheel once, a sharp, defeated sound in the confined space. She pulled out her phone and looked at the lock screen, a picture of Leo, all goofy grin and missing front teeth. His innocent, trusting face was a stark reminder of what was at stake. Her tears subsided, replaced by a slow-burning ember of defiance. Thompson, Evans, the whole soulless corporate machine, they thought they could erase her. They thought she would just disappear. They didn't know who they were dealing with. She wasn't just fighting for a paycheck anymore. She was fighting for Sully's dignity, for David's sanity, for the silent sorrow in Art Peterson's eyes. The next morning, she returned. She parked a block away, walked to the main entrance, and scanned the rules posted on the wall. Visiting hours, 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. All visitors must sign in. It was a flimsy loophole, but it was a loophole nonetheless. She walked to the front desk, smiled at the receptionist, and signed the log. Sarah Jenkins, visitor for S. Sullivan, room 305. And so began her life as a ghost in Scrubs. She'd enter as a visitor, then slip into a supply closet to change into a spare uniform she kept in her oversized tote bag. She became an expert in the facility's blind spots, the corridors without cameras, the shift changes where staff were distracted. She made her rounds quietly, a phantom providing the care that was otherwise absent. She cleaned wounds that were festering under shoddy dressings. She corrected medication dosages left by overworked nurses, and she sat with the men, listening to their stories. She became their secret keeper, their advocate, their angel of mercy. The cost of her crusade was devastating. Her savings evaporated. An eviction notice appeared on her apartment door, its bold red letters a beacon of her failure. One Tuesday afternoon, she found herself in a dingy pawn shop, sliding her grandmother's gold locket, the only piece of real jewelry she owned, across the counter. The $60 she got in return felt like 30 pieces of silver. That night, she watered down the tomato soup for dinner, pretending it was a new, healthier recipe. Leo, with the brutal honesty of an 8-year-old, looked down at his watery bowl and then up at her, his expression more confused than accusatory. "Mom," he asked, his small voice cutting through her carefully constructed composure. "Are we poor now?" The question shattered her. She forced a smile, blinked back the fresh wave of tears, and lied. "Of course not, sweetie. We're just on an adventure." Her continued presence did not go unnoticed. Director Thompson, a man whose authority was his entire identity, saw her quiet defiance as a declaration of war. He couldn't fire a ghost, so he resorted to a campaign of petty psychological torture, 1,000 paper cuts designed to make her bleed out. First, the visitor policy changed overnight. A new sign appeared at the front desk. All visitors must be on a pre-approved list provided by the patient. No exceptions. Suddenly, her name was never on the list. She was barred at the front door, forced to text Sully, who would then painstakingly wheel himself down to a rear service entrance and jimmy the lock to let her in. Then came the sabotage. Thompson would walk the wards, and a strange trail of misfortune would follow in Sarah's wake. Patient charts she had been meticulously updating would vanish. Special orders for supplies she'd requested, the high-absorption dressing for Sully's stump, the calming herbal tea for David were suddenly canceled, always with the same infuriating reason code. Budgetary constraints. The final escalation was a direct assault on her future. A thick, cream-colored envelope arrived in her mailbox, bearing the official seal of the State Board of Nursing. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It was a formal notice of investigation. An anonymous complaint had been filed against her, accusing her of practicing medicine without a license, of falsifying patient records, of willfully endangering the men she was trying to save. The language was cold, legal, and terrifying. It spoke of hearings, sanctions, and the possible revocation of her nursing license. It was a professional death sentence, and there was no name on the complaint, but she could feel Thompson's smug fingerprints all over it. He wasn't just trying to get her out of his facility. He was trying to burn her entire career to the ground. She was trapped, her compassion now twisted into a weapon aimed directly at her own throat. The war of attrition with Thompson was exhausting, but the open contempt from Dr. Evans was infuriating. Sarah had grown increasingly concerned about Art Peterson. His quietness was one thing, but she had noticed a persistent, wheezing cough and the beginnings of a nasty bed sore on his lower back. It was a classic sign of neglect for an immobile patient. She documented everything: the progression of the skin breakdown, his fluid intake, his rattling breaths. Armed with her clipboard of careful notes, she found Dr. Evans holding court with another physician by the nurse's station, a styrofoam cup of coffee in his hand. Dr. Evans, she began, keeping her voice respectful but firm. I need you to look at Mr. Peterson in 3B. His bed sore is progressing to stage 2, and I'm concerned about aspiration pneumonia. I think we need to get him on a pressure release mattress and start a course of preventative antibiotics. Evans didn't even glance at her notes. He took a long, slow sip of his coffee, a smirk playing on his lips. He turned to his colleague, a look of theatrical disbelief on his face, ensuring they had an audience of other staff members. Are you a doctor now, Ms. Jenkins? He asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Oh, that's right. You're not even a nurse here, are you? You're a liability with a clipboard. He tossed his empty cup into a nearby bin with a loud clatter. Stop playing Florence Nightingale and let the professionals do their jobs. Mr. Peterson is fine. He's old. Old people get spots and coughs. It's called aging. You might want to read a book about it if you can find the time between your visits. The public humiliation was a physical blow. Her cheeks burned. She could feel the eyes of the other nurses on her, a mixture of pity and fear. They knew she was right, but they also knew the price of challenging Dr. Evans. From down the hall, Sully, who had heard the whole exchange from his doorway, glared at the doctor with pure hatred. Sarah stood her ground, her jaw tight with suppressed rage. With all due respect, doctor, your negligence is going to kill him. Evans laughed, a short, barking sound. Get out of my sight before I have you thrown out. And that, he added, his eyes narrowing to slits, is a professional medical opinion. Thompson finally found his pretext. One evening, 2 months into her unpaid vigil, Sarah was in Sully's room, changing the dressing on his stump. He was telling her a story about his time in Da Nang, his voice low and raspy. It was a rare moment of peace in the chaotic facility. Suddenly, the overhead fluorescent lights flickered on, painfully bright. Thompson stood in the doorway, his arms crossed, a triumphant smirk on his face. Behind him stood 2 uniformed police officers. There she is, officers, Thompson announced, his voice booming in the small room. This woman is trespassing on private property. She has been warned repeatedly. I want her removed and charged. Sully shot up in his bed. She's done more for me in a night than you have in a year, you pencil-pushing coward, he roared. The cops, a veteran officer in his 50s and a much younger partner, looked deeply uncomfortable. Their eyes darted from Thompson's smug face to Sarah in her scrubs, to the angry, one-legged veteran in the bed. They were caught in a conflict that had nothing to do with the law. The older cop, whose name tag read Miller, took a step forward. Sir, with all due respect, she's a nurse tending to a patient. Can't we just ask her to leave for the night? No, Thompson said, his voice hard as steel. This facility has rules. She is not an employee. She is a trespasser. I want her out of here in handcuffs. The word hung in the air, ugly and final. Officer Miller sighed, his shoulders slumping. He had no choice. He turned to Sarah, his expression one of genuine apology. Ma'am, I'm sorry. You have to come with us. The humiliation was absolute. They led her out, her hands cuffed behind her back. She felt like a criminal. The walk down the hallway was a gauntlet of shame. The doors to the veterans' rooms were open. David watched from his doorway, his face a mask of silent anguish. Other men she had cared for, watched her being led away like a felon. As they guided her into the back of the squad car, the coarse plastic of the seat cold against her skin, Officer Miller leaned in close, his voice a low whisper. My brother served in Afghanistan, he said, his eyes meeting hers. He was in a place like this for a while. It nearly broke him, for what it's worth. Thank you. He shut the door softly. We have to take you in, but I'll put in a good word. I'll make sure the DA hears the full story. It was a small crumb of kindness in a universe of cruelty, but as the police car pulled away, leaving hope and honor behind, it was the only thing that kept Sarah from shattering completely. Miles away, in a cluttered cubicle illuminated by the blue glow of a monitor, Mark Chen, 26, was chasing the dregs of the day's news. A city council zoning dispute, a minor traffic accident, the usual fare for a junior reporter at a local news website. He was ambitious, hungry for a real story, but stuck in the minor leagues. He was about to log off when a new email popped into his inbox. The sender was anonymous. The subject line was an electric jolt. Heroism and corruption at Hope and Honor. His reporter's intuition screamed at him. He clicked it open. The body of the email was short, but it contained a link to a secure, password-protected file. The password was a single word: honor. Mark typed it in. The file unzipped, and its contents spilled onto his screen. It was a goldmine, a crystal-clear CCTV video file time-stamped from the previous evening. It showed a woman in scrubs, Sarah, being led down a hallway in handcuffs by two police officers. Scanned copies of internal memos, all signed by Alan Thompson, instructing staff to impede, report, and deny access to Sarah Jenkins. A PDF of the official complaint filed with the State Board of Nursing. Even to Mark's untrained eye, the accusations seemed vague and vindictive. Finally, a simple text file with a short, explosive message. They're trying to destroy a good woman for doing the right thing. She's been working for free for months because the director is a cheap bastard and the doctor is a negligent fool. The one she's fighting for most is a man named Arthur Peterson in room 3B. Look him up. The real story isn't the nurse they're crucifying, it's the hero they're letting die. Mark's heart was pounding. This was it. This was the story. He leaned forward, his fingers flying across the keyboard, his mind already racing. Arthur Peterson, room 3B. The name meant nothing to him, but he had a powerful feeling it was about to mean everything. The universe has a strange and terrible sense of timing. Just as Mark Chen began his frantic search, Sarah was being released from the local precinct. Officer Miller had been true to his word, arguing her case to the night sergeant, who had let her go on her own recognizance with a court date for trespassing. The charge was absurd, but the damage was done. It was 4 a.m. Her car was still parked near the facility. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at her to go home, to curl up in bed and never come back. But she couldn't. A gnawing, visceral fear for Art Peterson had taken root in her gut. Dr. Evans' casual dismissal of his symptoms echoed in her ears. She knew with the certainty of a seasoned nurse that Art was in danger. Defying all logic, she drove back, parking in the shadows. The side service door Sully always used was, miraculously, unlocked. She slipped inside, her heart pounding with a mixture of dread and adrenaline. The facility was quiet, but it was a tense, charged silence. As she neared Ward C, she heard it, the frantic, high-pitched beeping of a heart monitor in distress. She broke into a run. The sound was coming from room 3B. She burst into Art's room to find a scene of controlled chaos. Art was convulsing slightly in his bed, his face a deathly gray, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. The temp nurse, Brenda, was fumbling with an oxygen mask, her face pale with panic. "I don't know what's happening," she cried. "His pressure just dropped off a cliff." Sarah's training took over, a calm, authoritative presence in the storm of fear. "He's in septic shock. Get me his chart, now." She ripped the thin blanket off him, her hands moving with expert precision, checking for a pulse, assessing his condition. As she did, his worn, threadbare hospital gown tore open at the shoulder. Brenda shoved the chart into her hands. Sarah's eyes scanned the page, her blood running cold. Evans had ignored all her warnings, no antibiotics, no change in position. It was a death sentence by neglect. "He needs a broad-spectrum antibiotic. IV push, now," she barked, her voice a commander's crackle. "Evans was wrong. It's sepsis." Sully, woken by the commotion, had wheeled himself to the doorway. His eyes fell on Art's exposed shoulder, on the old, faded tattoo that was now clearly visible in the harsh light. It was an image of a bald eagle, its wings fiercely protective, encircling a single, five-pointed star. Sully gasped, a choked, incredulous sound. "My God," he whispered, his voice filled with a reverence Sarah had never heard from him before. He looked from the tattoo to Sarah, his eyes wide with dawning, impossible understanding. I'll be a son of a bitch," he breathed. "I've only seen that in books. That's the unofficial insignia. For the medal." Brenda looked confused, but Sarah understood. The medal. Sully's voice was barely a whisper. Art's a recipient. He's a Medal of Honor man." Mark Chen's fingers were a blur. The name Arthur Peterson had initially led to a dead end, a few public records, a birth certificate, but his source's email had pointed him toward military records. He cross-referenced the name with service branches with major conflicts. And then he found it. It was buried deep in the National Archives, a page of digital history that had been gathering dust for decades. Sergeant Arthur Peterson, U.S. Army, Medal of Honor. The citation was breathtaking. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. It detailed 3 harrowing days during the Battle of Chosin Reservoir in the winter of 1950. A young Sergeant Peterson, his platoon wounded and cut off, had single-handedly held off wave after wave of enemy soldiers, protecting his men in the brutal, sub-zero cold until reinforcements finally broke through. He was a legend, a hero from a forgotten war, long presumed to have passed away in quiet obscurity. And he was currently dying in a mismanaged care facility in their city. Mark felt a surge of adrenaline so powerful it made him dizzy. This wasn't just a local story anymore. This was a national disgrace. He began to type, the words pouring out of him in a torrent of righteous fury. He wove the narrative together. The selfless nurse, the vindictive director, the negligent doctor, the damning evidence from his source, and the staggering, unbelievable identity of the man at the center of it all. He wrote the headline last, knowing it was the most important part. It needed to be a punch to the gut. It needed to be perfect. Forgotten hero. Medal of Honor. Recipient left to die in neglectful VA facility. Unpaid nurse who fought for him arrested while saving his life. He attached the CCTV footage and Thompson's memos as direct evidence. He took a deep breath, his finger hovering over the Publish button. He clicked it. The story hit the internet at 5:15 a.m. For a few minutes, there was silence. Then the first comment appeared. Then 10. Then 100. The server analytics on Mark's screen, usually a slow, steady trickle, suddenly became a raging flood. The story was shared on Twitter, then Facebook. It was picked up by military blogs, then by national news aggregators. By 6 a.m., it was the #1 trending story in the country. The rage bait, carefully assembled from months of injustice, had been cast. And America had taken it. The story detonated with the force of a bomb. By dawn, the quiet suburban street outside the Hope and Honor facility looked like a movie premiere. News vans from every local and national network lined the curb. Their satellite dishes pointed at the sky like a thicket of metallic trees. The Medicor Solutions corporate office went into full-blown panic mode. Their stock was in freefall on the pre-market. A hastily called emergency board meeting resulted in a decision that was as swift as it was brutal. At 9:02 a.m., a press release was blasted out to every news organization in the country. Director Alan Thompson and Dr. Evans were terminated, effective immediately, for conduct unbecoming of the values of our organization. Thompson and Evans were caught trying to slip out a back entrance, only to be swarmed by a waiting pack of reporters, led by a relentless Mark Chen. "Mr. Thompson, why did you have a nurse arrested for trying to save a national hero?" "Dr. Evans, is it standard procedure to let Medal of Honor recipients develop sepsis?" They stammered and blustered, their faces pale with shock and fury, before shoving their way to their cars and speeding off, their careers and reputations in flaming ruins behind them. The political fallout was just as immediate. A prominent U.S. senator, a decorated veteran herself, arrived before noon. She held an impromptu press conference on the facility's front steps, her voice shaking with rage as she read excerpts from Mark's article. She promised a full, top-to-bottom federal investigation, her words a direct threat to Medicor's lucrative government contracts. For Sarah, the world had turned upside down. Her phone, which had been silent for months except for calls from bill collectors, was now ringing off the hook with messages from reporters, producers, and lawyers. The State Board of Nursing, in a move of breathtaking speed, not only dismissed the complaint against her, but issued a public commendation, praising her for actions demonstrating the highest ideals and moral courage of the nursing profession. The ghost had become a hero. The internet, so often a forum for negativity, rallied around Sarah with breathtaking force. Mark Chen, without telling her, had included a small link at the bottom of his article to a GoFundMe page he'd created, titled, "Pay Sarah Jenkins Back Wages." The initial goal was a modest $20,000 to cover her lost salary. By the end of the day, it had soared past $500,000, with donations pouring in from every state and from military bases around the world. Sarah sat at her kitchen table, watching the numbers climb on her phone screen, tears streaming down her face. They weren't tears of sadness or frustration anymore. They were tears of overwhelming, incomprehensible relief. The first thing she did was pay her back rent online. The second was to take Leo to a local pizza parlor and order the largest pizza on the menu, piled high with every topping he wanted. Watching him devour a slice, cheese stretching from his chin, was the most profound luxury she had ever known. A few days later, she got a call from the VA. Art Peterson, they explained, had been transferred to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. He was stable, recovering well, and was asking to see her. They flew her to Washington, D.C., first class. She walked into a spacious private room with a view of the Potomac. Art was sitting up in a chair, looking frail but lucid. The deep, haunting sadness in his eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet, settled peace. He gestured for her to come closer. She took his hand. It was thin and papery, but his grip was surprisingly firm. "All these years," he said, his voice raspy but clear as a bell. "People would sometimes find out about the medal, a reporter, a historian, and then they wouldn't see me anymore. They'd see a symbol, a ghost from a history book." He looked directly into her eyes, and she felt the full weight of his gratitude. "You were the first person in a very, very long time who just saw a man who needed his pillow fluffed and his back checked for sores. You saw Art." He squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you for seeing me." In that quiet room, holding the hand of a living legend, Sarah finally received her payment. It wasn't the money in the GoFundMe account or the laudatory newspaper articles, it was this. This quiet moment of human connection, this profound acknowledgement of her simple, stubborn compassion. It was worth more than anything. 6 months passed. The federal investigation had ripped through Medicor Solutions, exposing a systemic culture of neglect for profit. Their contracts were under review and heads had rolled at the highest levels. The Hope and Honor facility had been taken over directly by the Department of Veterans Affairs. Sarah was summoned to a meeting with the new Oversight Committee, headed by the same fiery senator who had championed her cause. She assumed they were going to offer her a job, perhaps as a head nurse. She was wrong. "Ms. Jenkins," the senator said, her tone serious, "we don't want you to work in the new Hope and Honor. We want you to run it. We are offering you the position of Director of Nursing. We want you to take this broken place and rebuild it from the ground up, based on one principle: compassion first. No more budgets over bodies." Sarah was stunned, but she knew her answer before they had even finished the offer. She accepted. The final scene takes place a year after she took the job. The Hope and Honor facility is unrecognizable. The walls are freshly painted in warm, bright colors. Sunlight streams through clean windows. There are new therapy rooms, a vibrant community garden, and the sound of laughter in the halls. It is a place of healing now, not a place of waiting. Sarah, dressed in professional attire but with the same kind, watchful eyes, walks the corridors. She is no longer a ghost, but a guardian. She passes Sully, who is now mentoring a young amputee from a recent conflict, teaching him the finer points of navigating VA bureaucracy. She sees David, who is leading a peer support group, his voice steady and confident. She continues to the sunny solarium at the end of the hall. There, sitting at a small table, is Art Peterson. He had insisted on returning to the facility, saying it was his home now. He is not staring blankly out the window. He is leaning over a piece of paper, a watercolor brush in his hand, patiently showing a young boy with a goofy grin and a missing front tooth how to paint a majestic eagle. Leo looks up as Sarah approaches, his face beaming. "Look, Mom, Art's teaching me how to paint the medal." Art looks up at Sarah and a genuine, warm smile spreads across his face. He gives her a small, conspiratorial wink. Sarah smiles back, a look of profound, hard-won peace settling over her. She watched the old hero and the young boy, a perfect portrait of past and future, of honor and hope, all of it reclaimed from the ashes of neglect by one woman's simple, stubborn refusal to walk away. The war was over. She had won.